Hey loves, welcome back to Month K-Drama Love Stories.
The children's cafe in Gangnam hummed with the gentle chaos of a Saturday afternoon. Pastel-colored balloons bobbed against the ceiling, their ribbons dancing in the warm air circulating from the vents. Toddlers and miniature sneakers waddled between foam play structures, while mothers sipped lattes and exchanged stories of sleepless nights and preschool applications. No one noticed the man standing in the doorway. No one except the woman. She felt him before she saw him. A shift in the atmosphere, a sudden density in the air that made the fine hairs on her arms rise. Her hand, reaching for a napkin, paused mid-motion. The plastic cup of strawberry milk she'd been about to wipe clean trembled slightly, the pink liquid sloshing against the rim. Her eyes lifted, and the world tilted. He stood at the entrance of the cafe, a silhouette against the bright Seoul afternoon. His presence so sudden and commanding that the ambient noise seemed to warp around him. The overhead lights caught the angles of his face, the sharp jawline softened by a meticulously groomed beard, the high cheekbones that spoke of mixed heritage, the eyes that had gone utterly still. Those eyes. She remembered those eyes from 7 years ago. Dark, intense, capable of both devastating tenderness and terrifying coldness. Now they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite parse. Shock, certainly, but beneath it something rawer, something that looked almost like pain. The man's hair was cropped close on the sides in a precise buzz fade, the dark strands graduating into shoulder-length dreadlocks that fell past his collar. Intricate patterns crawled up the visible column of his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his designer shirt. His left hand, gripping the door frame, revealed more ink, geometric patterns that wrapped around his wrist and disappeared under his sleeve. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. Magnetic, terrifying, irresistible. Kwame. Her throat closed. The name surfaced from the depths of her memory like a bubble rising through dark water. It had been years since she'd let herself think it, years since she'd whispered it into the darkness of her Seoul apartment, years since she'd convinced herself she'd moved on. But he was here, in her cafe, watching her. The toddler in the high chair beside her chose that moment to shriek with laughter, banging a plastic spoon against the tray. The sound snapped her out of her trance, and she looked down at the child, her child, with a sudden surge of protectiveness that bordered on primal. He can't see him. He can't. Not like this. But it was too late. She saw the moment Kwame's gaze registered the small figure in the high chair. The dark-haired boy with her cheekbones and his father's eyes. The boy who had inherited his grandmother's gentle smile and his mother's quiet determination. The boy who was currently smearing yogurt across his face with the single-minded focus that only 3-year-olds possess. The boy who had never met his father. Kwame's hand dropped from the doorframe. He stepped into the cafe, his movements unnaturally controlled, like a predator who had spotted prey and was calculating the most efficient approach. The other patrons didn't notice him. They were too absorbed in their own dramas, their own small worlds. But the woman noticed everything. The slight hitch in his stride, the way his jaw tightened, the micro-expressions that flickered across his face too quickly to name. No, not here. Not now. Her name was Tendai, and she had spent the last 7 years building a life that had no room for the man approaching her now. She had left Korea with nothing but a broken heart and a secret growing in her womb. She had returned to her mother's homeland of Zimbabwe, had given birth in a small clinic outside Harare, had raised her son alone while finishing her engineering degree through correspondence. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes of what Kwame had destroyed. And now he was walking toward her with that same intense focus he'd always had, the focus that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. Tendai, her name in his voice, deep, resonant, with the faintest trace of the accent that had once made her knees weak. It was still the same, that particular way he rolled the syllables as if tasting them. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her voice had lodged somewhere in her throat, trapped behind the sudden surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Auntie Tendai, who is that? The high-pitched voice came from her right, and she forced herself to turn toward it. The little girl in the neighboring booth was pointing at Kwame with undisguised curiosity, her mother trying to shush her. Just someone your auntie used to know, Tendai managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Eat your cake, Namsa. But Kwame had already reached her table. He stood there, a towering presence that seemed to suck all the air from the immediate vicinity. The toddler in the high chair, her son, her Tafadzwa, looked up with the guileless curiosity of the very young. "Mama!" Tafadzwa's voice was soft, questioning. He'd inherited her soft-spoken nature, her tendency to observe before speaking. Tendai reached out and touched her son's cheek. A gesture of comfort meant as much for herself as for him. "It's okay, baby. Finish your milk." But Tafadzwa wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the strange man who had materialized beside their table, and there was something in his young eyes that made Tendai's heart stop. Recognition. Impossible. He'd never seen Kwame. Not even in pictures. She'd been too careful for that. But there was something primal in the way the child studied the man, something that transcended conscious memory. Kwame was looking at Tafadzwa with an expression that cracked something open in Tendai's chest. It wasn't anger, which she'd braced for. It wasn't accusation, which she'd expected. It was wonder. Pure, unadulterated wonder. "He's mine." Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered with the certainty that had always been Kwame's trademark. "Tendai, that boy is mine." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with 7 years of silence, 7 years of secrets, 7 years of carefully constructed walls. "I have to go," Tendai said, her voice barely above a whisper. She began gathering her things, the diaper bag, the sippy cup, the half-eaten snacks. Her movements were jerky, desperate. "Tafadzwa, we need to go now." "Mama, I'm not done with my milk." "Now, Tafadzwa." She lifted her son from the high chair, her arms trembling with the effort of holding him steady. He was a solid weight against her chest, warm and real and hers. She would not let Kwame take this from her. She would not let him disrupt the life she'd built. "Tendai." His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Don't run from me. Not again." She froze. Not again. The words implied that she had run before, and in a way she had. But she hadn't been running from him. She'd been running to something. To safety. To sanity. To a life where her son wouldn't grow up surrounded by the violence and chaos that followed Kwame like a shadow. "I'm not running," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "I'm protecting my son." She saw the flicker of something in his expression. Hurt, perhaps, or regret. It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Our son," he corrected, his voice dropping even lower. "You kept him from me. 7 years, Tendai. 7 years. Tendai shook her head, clutching Tafadzwa closer. The boy was starting to squirm, sensing the tension radiating from his mother. "We're not having this conversation here. Not now." "Then when?" Kwame stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him. Cedar and something darker. Something that reminded her of late nights and whispered promises. "You've had 7 years to prepare. I've had 5 minutes. Give me something. Give me anything. Please." The word escaped her before she could stop it. "Please, Kwame. Not here. Not in front of him." Something in his expression shifted. The intensity didn't fade, but it softened around the edges, taking on a quality she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. "Fine," he said, stepping back. "But we're not done, Tendai. We are far from done." 2 hours later, Tendai sat in her apartment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Tafadzwa was napping in his room, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of childhood dreams. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and the silence pressed against her ears like a physical weight. She'd spent the last hour trying to convince herself that she'd imagined the entire encounter. That Kwame hadn't materialized in that cafe like a ghost from her past. That he hadn't looked at her son with that expression of dawning realization. But she knew better. Kwame wasn't the kind of man you imagined. He was the kind of man who left permanent marks on your life, whether you wanted them or not. He was a force of nature, impossible to ignore and impossible to predict. She'd learned that lesson 7 years ago. The first time she'd met him, she'd been 24 years old, fresh out of university, and utterly unprepared for the impact he would have on her life. She'd been working as a junior engineer at a construction firm in Seoul, one of the few black women in her field, and she'd been determined to prove herself. Then Kwame had walked into her office. He'd been a client. Her boss had mentioned something about a new development project, something about a businessman looking to invest in Korean real estate. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. She'd been too focused on her blueprints, too absorbed in the calculations that filled her days. But the moment she'd looked up and seen him standing in her doorway, she'd forgotten how to breathe. He'd been younger then, less hardened, less burdened by whatever shadows had settled into his eyes over the years. His hair had been shorter, the dreadlocks just beginning to form, the beard less dense. He'd been wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, and there'd been something about the way he moved, fluid, controlled, deliberate, that had made her heart stutter. "Engineer Tendai?" His voice had been warm, almost amused. "I've been told you're the best." She'd managed to nod, her throat too tight for speech. "I try. I'm Kwame." He'd extended his hand, and she'd noticed the tattoos peeking out from beneath his cuff. "I'm looking to build something beautiful, something that matters." She'd taken his hand, and the contact had sent a jolt through her that she still remembered. His palm had been warm, calloused, and there'd been something in his grip that said he was used to getting what he wanted. "I'll do my best," she'd said, and she had. She'd poured everything into that project. Her expertise, her passion, her soul. She'd worked late nights and early mornings, driven by something she couldn't quite name. She'd wanted to impress him, she'd realized later. She'd wanted to prove that she was worthy of his attention. But she'd never expected what came next. The days following the cafe encounter passed in a blur of anxiety and hypervigilance. Tendai found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, waiting for the moment Kwame would appear again. She'd canceled her usual routine. No more trips to the children's cafe, no more walks through the park, no more visits to the grocery store at predictable times. She was hiding, and she hated it. But what else could she do? Kwame wasn't just any man. He was a force with resources she couldn't begin to fathom. He had connections, influence, power. If he wanted to find her, he would. The question was what he would do when he did. "You're worrying again, Mama." Tendai looked up from her laptop, where she'd been staring at the same line of code for the past hour. Tafadzwa stood in the doorway of his bedroom, his small face creased with concern. "I'm fine, baby. Just working." "You were frowning." He padded over to her, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Are you thinking about the man from the cafe?" Her heart stuttered. "What makes you say that?" Tafadzwa shrugged, a gesture he'd somehow picked up from the children at his daycare. "He looked at you funny, like he wanted to hug you but couldn't, out of the mouths of babes." Tendai pulled her son onto her lap, burying her face in his soft hair. "He's just someone I used to know, sweetie. Nothing for you to worry about." "Was he your friend?" "Something like that." "Will I see him again?" She hesitated. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. What could she say? That she hoped not? That she was terrified of what would happen if she did? "I don't know, baby. I really don't know." In the end, it wasn't Kwame who found her again. It was his grandmother. The woman appeared at Tendai's door 3 days after the cafe encounter, her elegant gray hair swept into an intricate updo, her hanbok the color of autumn leaves. She was small and wiry, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a presence that filled the hallway despite her diminutive stature. "Engineer Tendai," she said, her voice surprisingly deep for her size. "I've come to speak with you." Tendai's first instinct was to close the door. Her second was to demand how the woman had found her. Her third, and the one she went with, was to invite her in. It was the Zimbabwean in her she'd later reflect. The culture that taught her to respect her elders, to open her home to strangers, to trust in the hospitality that had sustained her ancestors for generations. "How did you find me?" she asked as she led the woman into her small living room. "I haven't spoken to anyone. I haven't. My grandson is many things," the woman interrupted, settling into the armchair with the regal grace of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "But stupid is not one of them. He's had people watching you since the cafe. He wanted to give you space, but I'm more impatient." The admission sent a chill down Tendai's spine. People watching her? How long had that been happening? What did they see? "He's been respectful," the older woman continued, as if reading her thoughts. No one has entered your home. No one has approached you. He's been waiting for you to come to him. I'm not going to. You will. The woman's eyes met hers, and Tendai saw the steel beneath the silk. You will, or you'll tell me why you shouldn't. The challenge hung in the air between them. Tendai found herself in a war of wills with a woman who had probably been winning such battles since before she was born. Your grandson, she finally managed, her voice tight. He's not a good man. He's a complicated man, the woman corrected. There's a difference. He kills people. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but they needed to be said. They needed to be acknowledged. She needed this woman to understand why she'd kept her son a secret, why she'd fled in the middle of the night without a word of explanation. For a long moment, the older woman was silent. Then she nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I know what my grandson does, she said. I know what he's capable of. But I also know what he's capable of being, if given the chance. The question is whether you're willing to give him that chance, or whether you're determined to cling to your judgment. It's not judgment, Tendai protested. It's self-preservation. It's protecting my son. And I understand that. The woman leaned forward, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. But here's what I know, Engineer Tendai. My grandson was not a good man before he met you. He was lost, angry, adrift. You changed something in him. You made him want to be better. And then you disappeared. I had my reasons. I don't doubt that. The woman reached out and took Tendai's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But I also know that my grandson has never stopped searching for you. 7 years, Engineer Tendai. 7 years of looking. 7 years of hoping. And now he's found you, and he's learned he has a son, and he's trying to be patient. But my grandson's patience only lasts so long. Tendai pulled her hand away. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to talk to him. The woman rose, her movements fluid despite her age. I want you to see him, really see him, and decide for yourself whether the man he is now is the same man you left. The Grand Hyatt Seoul was a monument to luxury, its glass facade reflecting the city skyline in shimmering fragments. Tendai had been here once before, 7 years ago, on a night that had changed everything. Now she stood in the lobby, her palms sweating, her heart racing, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Talk to him, see him, decide for yourself. And she found herself walking toward the elevators, her feet carrying her forward despite her misgivings. The penthouse suite was at the top of the building, accessible only by a private elevator that required a keycard. Tendai had been given one by the older woman, who'd pressed it into her palm with a knowing smile. When you're ready, she'd said. When you realize that running isn't the answer. The elevator rose in silence, the numbers blinking upward with inexorable precision. Tendai watched them, counting down the moments until she would see him again. What would she say? What would she do? How would she explain the years of silence, the secrets, the lies? But when the doors opened and she stepped into the suite, all her carefully rehearsed words evaporated. The room was vast, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, but Tendai barely noticed any of it. Her attention was fixed on the figure standing by the window, his back to her, his silhouette outlined against the Seoul skyline. Kwame. He turned as she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. The air between them was thick with unspoken history, with 7 years of questions and accusations and unresolved feelings. Tendai. His voice was rough, as if he hadn't spoken in days. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I. She stayed by the door, keeping distance between them. Your grandmother is very persuasive. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She's a force of nature. She always has been. He gestured toward the couch. Will you sit? I promise I won't bite. She moved to the couch, perching on the edge of the cushion like a bird ready to take flight. Kwame watched her with those intense eyes, taking in her appearance with an attention that made her skin prickle. You're still beautiful, he said, and the words were so unexpected that she felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm not here for compliments. I know. He sat across from her, his posture carefully casual. But that doesn't make it untrue. Tendai looked away, focusing on the pattern of the rug beneath her feet. Why did you want to see me, Kwame? Really? I wanted to see my son. The words were simple, direct, and impossible to argue with. I wanted to meet him, to know him, to be part of his life. He doesn't know you. Then let me change that. Kwame leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I know I'm not the man you wanted me to be. I know I've done things I can't undo. But I want to be different. I want to be better. For him. For you. The words hit Tendai like a physical blow. She'd prepared for anger, for accusations, for demands. She hadn't prepared for this vulnerability, this plea. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How can you possibly be different when you're still doing the things you do? Kwame was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, holding it out to her. Tendai took it, her fingers trembling. The image showed a construction site, a massive development with soaring glass towers and sleek modern lines. It was beautiful, ambitious, the kind of project that would define a city skyline. This is mine, Kwame said. A legitimate business. Something I built from the ground up with the money I made from other things. This is what I've been working toward. This is what I want to be. Tendai stared at the photograph, her mind racing. She was an engineer. She could see the quality of the design, the precision of the planning. This wasn't a front or a pretense. This was real. I had to keep my options open, Kwame continued. I had to maintain certain connections. But the end game was always this. Something clean. Something that would make you proud if you ever saw it. He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers warm against her skin. I know you don't trust me, he said. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. Not for me. For our son. He deserves to know his father. He deserves to have a father who's trying to be good. Tendai felt tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. He's 3 years old, she said. He's smart and funny and kind. He has your eyes. He has my mother's smile. He's everything I ever wanted. And I've kept him from you because I was afraid. You were right to be afraid. Kwame's voice was heavy with self-recrimination. I was in a dark place back then. I couldn't see a future beyond the violence, beyond the... He broke off, shaking his head. But I'm not that man anymore, Tendai. I've changed. I'm different now. Is it possible? She asked. Can people really change that much? People can if they have the right motivation. He squeezed her hand, his grip gentle. And you gave me the right motivation. From the moment I met you, I wanted to be worthy of you. And I failed. I let you go. And I've been trying to become the man you deserved ever since. Tendai closed her eyes, and the years fell away. She was 24 again, standing in her office, looking at a man who would turn her world upside down. She was 25, falling in love despite every warning bell screaming in her head. She was 26, discovering she was pregnant, watching Kwame get dragged deeper into the darkness, terrified for her life and the life growing inside her. She'd made a decision back then, and she'd stood by it. She'd protected herself. She'd protected her son. But what if she'd been wrong? What if the man standing in front of her was different now? Changed, transformed by the same love that had once made her risk everything. I can't promise anything, she finally said, opening her eyes. I can't promise I'll trust you. I can't promise this will be easy. But I can try. Kwame's face broke into a smile, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, and Tendai's heart stuttered. It was the smile she remembered, the one that had made her fall in love with him in the first place, the one that had convinced her he was more than the violence and the darkness. I won't let you down, he said. I promise. And for the first time in 7 years, Tendai felt something loosen in her chest. The weeks that followed were a careful ballet of negotiation and tentative trust. Kwame approached each interaction with Tafadzwa like a man learning to walk again. Careful, deliberate, terrified of falling. He started small. Visits to the apartment, always announced in advance. Presents that were thoughtful but not overwhelming. A children's book about construction trucks. A set of building blocks. A stuffed animal that the little boy promptly named Bear why? Tafadzwa, to Tendai's surprise, responded with an openness that bordered on miraculous. There was none of the wariness she'd expected, none of the suspicion that adults often carry into new relationships. Children, she'd learned, were capable of a grace that adults rarely achieved. They could accept love without questioning its provenance, trust without demanding guarantees. You came back, Tafadzwa said one afternoon, looking at Kwame with those serious, dark eyes. Why did you come back? Kwame knelt beside the boy, his large frame folding with surprising grace. Because I wanted to meet you, he said. I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time. Where were you before? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Tendai held her breath, waiting to see how Kwame would answer. I was lost, he said finally. I was doing things that made it hard for me to find my way. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Tafadzwa considered this with the gravity of someone far older than his years. Okay, he said finally. Do you want to see my tower? And just like that, the ice was broken. Seoul in autumn was a city transformed. The ginkgo trees that lined the boulevards had turned a brilliant gold, their leaves carpeting the sidewalks in a riot of color. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant cooking fires. Tendai had always loved this season. In Zimbabwe, the seasons were less pronounced. There was rainy and dry, but not this dramatic shift from green to gold to bare. The change felt magical, temporary, a reminder that nothing lasted forever. You're thinking too hard again. She looked up to find Kwame watching her, a slight smile playing on his lips. They were sitting in a cafe near her apartment, the same one where she'd first encountered him again. Felt almost like fate. I'm always thinking, she admitted. It's what engineers do. Engineers and architects. He laughed, a warm sound that made something flutter in her chest. We're a pair, aren't we? I thought you were a businessman now. Real estate development requires an understanding of architecture. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed in a way she'd never seen him. I've been studying, taking courses. I wanted to understand what you do, at least a little bit. The admission caught her off guard. You took courses? In architecture. Nothing too formal. Some online classes. A few textbooks. He shrugged, as if it were nothing. I wanted to be able to talk to you about your work. I wanted to understand what you see when you look at a building. Tendai felt a lump form in her throat. She'd spent so long thinking of Kwame as the man who had been lost to violence, the man she'd had to leave behind. She'd never imagined he might be capable of this quiet, persistent effort to bridge the gap between them. And do you understand? She asked. What I see. I think I'm starting to. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. I think what you see is potential. You see what a building could be, not just what it is. You see the beauty that exists in the spaces between things. She blinked, startled by his perception. That's exactly right. Your mother taught you that. It wasn't a question. You told me once, years ago, about how you learned to see the world through her eyes. Tendai nodded, the memory washing over her. Her mother had died before she'd met Kwame, before she'd fallen in love, before she'd fled to Korea with nothing but hope and determination. Her mother had been a teacher, a woman of infinite patience and wisdom, the kind of person who saw beauty in everything. I should have listened to her more, Tendai said softly. She always said I was too stubborn. You're not stubborn. Kwame grinned. You're determined. There's a difference. And what about you? What are you determined to do? Everything in my power to make this work. The smile faded, replaced by something more serious, more vulnerable. I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I've given you every reason to run. But I'm asking you to trust me, to believe that I can be different. Tendai reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I'm trying, she said. I want to believe. I really do. The culture of Zimbabwe was woven into Tendai's very bones. It was there in the way she greeted her elders with a respectful bow of her head, in the way she offered hospitality to strangers, in the way she taught Tafadzwa to appreciate the small things, the taste of a mango, the sound of rain, the warmth of the sun on his skin. She'd grown up in a household that celebrated the Shona traditions of her ancestors, where stories were passed down through generations and community was everything. The concept of unhu, the belief that a person's humanity is defined by their relationships with others, had shaped her worldview in ways she was only beginning to understand. And now she found herself sharing those traditions with Kwame, watching him absorb them with a reverence that surprised her. "Your grandmother told me about the ancestral spirits," he said one evening, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse. The city sprawled below them, a glittering mosaic of light and shadow. "She said they guide the living if we're willing to listen." Tendai nodded, surprised that his grandmother had shared so much. "In Zimbabwe, we believe that the spirits of our ancestors remain with us. They watch over us, protect us, offer guidance when we need it." "And you believe that?" "With my whole heart." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "When I was pregnant with Tafadzwa, I felt my mother's presence so strongly. I felt her telling me that everything would be okay, that I was strong enough to handle whatever came my way. It gave me hope when I had none." Kwame was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I never had that," he said. "My parents died when I was young. My grandmother raised me and she did her best, but there was so much she couldn't teach me. I had to learn to survive on my own, to trust no one, to protect myself at any cost." "But you don't want that anymore." "No." He shook his head, his dreadlocks brushing against his shoulders. "I don't want to be that person. I want to be someone Tafadzwa can look up to, someone you can be proud of." Tendai reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You're already on your way," she said. "I can see it. I can feel it." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment. When he opened them, they were filled with a warmth that made her heart ache. "I love you," he said. "I've never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in 7 years." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. "I love you too," Tendai whispered, and the admission felt like a release, like a weight she'd been carrying for years finally being set down. "But I'm scared. I'm scared of what you used to be. I'm scared of what you might become. I can only promise you what I'll do going forward." He took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "I can't change the past, but I can shape the future. I can be better. I can be the man you deserve." And for the first time in 7 years, Tendai felt herself truly believing. The first time Kwame met the rest of Tendai's family was by accident. They'd been out for a walk, the three of them, Tendai, Kwame, and Tafadzwa, when they'd run into a group of Zimbabwean expats enjoying a picnic in the park. The women had looked at Kwame with open curiosity, their eyes traveling over his height, his hair, his tattoos, his undeniable presence. "Tendai, it's been ages." One of the women had rushed over, her arms open wide. "And this must be Tafadzwa. He's grown so much." The embrace was warm, familiar, the kind of easy affection that made Tendai's heart ache. She'd missed this, the camaraderie of her community, the sense of belonging that came with shared culture and experience. "Kwame, this is my friend Rudo," she said, introducing him. "We worked together at the engineering firm before I left." Rudo's eyes widened. "You're Kwame? The one from—" She caught herself, her cheeks flushing. "I mean, the one you told us about?" Kwame's smile was easy, but Tendai could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew what she'd told her friends about him. He knew what they thought. "That's me," he said. "The one from before. But I'd like to think I'm different now." Ruto studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "Different is good," she said. "Different means you've learned something. Different means you're trying." The conversation that followed was a revelation to Kwame. He'd grown up in a world of secrets and shadows, where trust was a weakness and vulnerability was a death sentence. But listening to Tendai's friends, watching them interact with each other and with their children, he saw something he'd never experienced. A community that supported each other, that lifted each other up, that celebrated each other's successes and carried each other through failures. "Is it always like this?" he asked Tendai later, as they walked home through the golden streets. "Is it always so open?" "Open?" She tilted her head, puzzled. What do you mean? I mean the way you talk to each other, the way you share things, the way you trust each other. He shook his head, marveling. I've never seen anything like it. Tendai smiled. That's community, Kwame. That's what it means to be Shona. We believe that we're all connected, that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. So we support each other, we protect each other, we love each other. And I never had that. But you have it now. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You're part of our community now, if you want to be. He stopped walking, turning to face her. The streetlights cast golden halos around them, and the autumn leaves drifted down like confetti. I want to be, he said, more than anything. Tafadzwa's 4th birthday was a celebration of cultures. The Zimbabwean community came in full force. Aunts and uncles and cousins and friends, all of them bearing gifts and food and blessings. The children ran through the apartment, shrieking with laughter, while the adults exchanged stories and recipes and news from home. And through it all, Kwame watched. He watched Tendai move through the crowd, a queen among her people, her smile bright and her laughter warm. He watched Tafadzwa open his presents with the joy that only a 4-year-old could muster. He watched the community that had embraced him, that had welcomed him despite everything they knew about his past. I told you they'd accept you, Tendai said, appearing at his elbow. I told you they'd see who you are now. Kwame shook his head, still amazed. I don't deserve this. Maybe not. She smiled up at him, her eyes soft. But you're going to earn it. I know you will. The invitation came a week later. It was from Kwame's grandmother, delivered by a uniformed courier with impeccable posture and a neutral expression. The paper was thick, cream-colored, embossed with a family crest that Tendai had never seen. You are invited to a family dinner, the text read. Please bring Tendai and Tafadzwa. We would be honored to welcome them to our home. This is it, Kwame said, his voice tight with nervous energy. This is the next step. She's bringing you into the family. Tendai's heart raced. She'd met Kwame's grandmother once, but that had been on neutral ground. This would be different. This would be her entering their world, accepting their hospitality, becoming part of their history. I'm scared, she admitted. What if they don't like me? What if they don't like Tafadzwa? Kwame took her hands, his grip steady and strong. They will love you, he said. They will love Tafadzwa. How could they not? The dinner was held at a traditional Korean house, the kind of hanok that had been preserved through generations. The low tables were arranged around the main room, cushions on the floor providing comfortable seating for the extended family that had gathered. Tendai felt nervous in a way she hadn't anticipated. She dressed in a modern silhouette, a structured blouse in deep burgundy paired with a sleek pencil skirt in black, practical and professional, designed to make a good impression without being overly formal. Tafadzwa looked adorable in his miniature suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his shoes polished to a shine. Kwame had helped him dress, had shown him how to stand up straight and say "Annyeonghaseyo" with just the right amount of respect. And now they were here, surrounded by the family that had been kept from them for 7 years. Kwame's grandmother, Harabiaji, as she'd instructed them to call her, presided over the gathering like a queen. Her gray hair was swept into an elegant bun, her dress a modern interpretation of traditional Korean clothing, her eyes sharp and knowing. Engineer Tendai, she said, her voice carrying across the room. Thank you for coming. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward Tendai. Thank you for having us, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. We're honored to be here. The grandmother nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. You raised a fine son, she said, her gaze shifting to Tafadzwa. He has your eyes and my grandson's spirit, a formidable combination. Tafadzwa, who had been clinging to his mother's hand, stepped forward with a courage that made Tendai's heart swell. Thank you, he said, his voice clear and serious. I'm happy to meet you. The grandmother's face broke into a smile. And I'm happy to meet you, child. Come here. Let me look at you properly. Tafadzwa went to her without hesitation, climbing onto her lap with the trust of a child who knew he was safe. Tendai watched, her eyes burning with unshed tears. This is what she'd been missing. This is what she'd been running from. Not the danger, not the violence, but this warmth, this acceptance, this love. The dinner was a marvel of cultural fusion. Harabiyaji had arranged for a menu that honored both traditions. Korean dishes prepared with the care that only a grandmother could provide, alongside Zimbabwean specialties that Tendai had taught the kitchen staff to make. The flavors mingled in unexpected ways, creating something new and beautiful. "This is what we want," Kwame said, leaning close to Tendai as the meal progressed. "This blending of our worlds, this celebration of everything we are, and everything we could be," she agreed. The conversation flowed around them, the family asking questions about Tafadzwa, about Tendai's work, about her life in Korea. They were respectful without being invasive, curious without being demanding. And through it all, Tendai felt herself relaxing, opening up in ways she hadn't expected. "I was scared to come here," she admitted to Harabiyaji as the evening wound down. "I was scared you wouldn't accept us." The grandmother's eyes softened. "Your family, child. You've always been family. We just didn't know it." Later, after Tafadzwa had fallen asleep in a guest room and the other family members had departed, Kwame and Tendai stood on the veranda of the hammock, looking out at the Seoul skyline. "I never thought I'd have this," Kwame said, his voice quiet. "I never thought I'd have a family. I never thought I'd have a reason to be good. I never thought I'd find my way back to you," Tendai replied. "I thought I'd lost you forever. We found each other." He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable. "And I'm not going to let you go again. I promise." Tendai stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. She could feel his heart beating beneath her ear, steady and strong. "I believe you," she said. "I believe you're going to be the man I always knew you could be." The delivery came on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Tendai's door like a venomous serpent. "We know who you are," the note read. "We know who your son is. We know who you're with. You think he's changed? You think he can escape? The past always finds a way." Tendai's blood ran cold. She read the words 3 times, each time hoping they would say something different, mean something different. But they didn't. They were a threat, plain and simple. Her hands shook as she dialed Kwame's number. "Tendai? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak. The words were stuck in her throat, trapped behind the terror that had suddenly consumed her. "I need you to come over," she finally managed. "Now, please. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Don't open the door for anyone." 10 minutes. She could survive 10 minutes. But the minutes stretched, each one an eternity. She sat in the corner of her living room, Tafadzwa's favorite toy clutched in her hands, her eyes fixed on the door. Who had sent that note? What did they want? Was Kwame in danger? Was she? By the time Kwame arrived, she was almost hysterical. "Tendai." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling in front of her, taking her face in his hands. "Look at me. What happened?" She handed him the note, her fingers trembling so badly she almost dropped it. He read it once, his face going still. Then he read it again, and something shifted in his expression. Something cold, something dangerous, something that reminded her of the man she'd fled 7 years ago. "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "No, Kwame. You can't. I'm not going to do anything." He said it carefully, deliberately, as if he was having to force himself not to. "I'm not going to do anything right now. But I need to know who sent this. I need to know what they want. It doesn't matter what they want." Tendai's voice was fierce. "What matters is keeping Tafadzwa safe. Keeping us safe. And I will." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I swear to you, Tendai, I will protect you. Whatever it takes." The investigation began quietly. Kwame moved Tendai and Tafadzwa to a new apartment, one that he'd been keeping as a safe house for emergencies. The building was anonymous, unremarkable, the kind of place where people kept to themselves and didn't ask questions. "I'm not going to hide forever," Tendai said as she unpacked boxes in the new space. "I'm not going to live in fear." "You're not hiding." Kwame helped her set up Tafadzwa's toys, his movements careful and controlled. "You're being smart. There's a difference. And what about you? What are you going to do?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a stuffed elephant, studying it with an intensity that the toy didn't deserve. "I'm going to find out who sent that note," he said finally. "And I'm going to make sure they never threaten you or Tafadzwa again." Tendai knew what that meant. She knew the kind of work Kwame used to do, the kind of work he'd sworn he'd left behind. "You can't," she said. "You can't go back to that life. You promised." "I know." He set down the elephant, turning to face her. "And I meant that promise. But I also promised to protect you, and I'm going to keep that promise too. I have to do this, Tendai. I have to make sure you're safe. Then find another way." She stepped toward him, taking his hands. "Find a way that doesn't involve going back to who you were. Please. For me. For Tafadzwa." He looked at her, his eyes full of a struggle she couldn't fully understand. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll find another way. I promise." The next few weeks were a careful dance of caution and determination. Kwame used his resources, his connections, the skills he'd honed over years of navigating a dangerous world. But he did it differently this time. He did it with restraint, with calculation, with a commitment to the promise he'd made Tendai. And gradually, he began to unravel the threads of who had sent that note. "You're not going to like this," he said one evening, sitting across from her in their new apartment. The sun had set hours ago, and the only light was from a single lamp in the corner of the room. "But I think you need to know." Tendai's stomach clenched. "What is it?" "It's someone from my past." He ran a hand over his face, his expression tired and worn. "Someone who didn't approve when I tried to leave. Someone who's been watching, waiting for an opportunity to pull me back in." "Pull you back into what?" "Into the life I left behind." His voice was bitter. "Into the violence, the chaos, the darkness. They think I belong there. They think I can't really change." "Who is it?" Tendai asked. "Who's doing this?" Kwame hesitated. "My second in command. The man who took over when I left. He didn't want me to go. He didn't believe I could walk away. He's been trying to prove himself right ever since." Tendai felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Is he dangerous?" "Very." Kwame's voice was grim. "He's dangerous, and he's smart, and he's determined. He'll try to push me back into the life I left. He'll use you, he'll use Tafadzwa, he'll do whatever it takes." "What are we going to do?" "Trust me." He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "Trust that I'm not the same person I was. Trust that I can handle this without losing myself." Tendai looked at him, at the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, at the man she was falling in love with all over again. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I trust you." The meeting was tense. Kwame had arranged to meet his old second-in-command at a neutral location, a quiet tea house in the older part of the city. He'd told Tendai to stay behind, to wait for his return. But Tendai had never been good at waiting. She'd followed him, watching from a distance as he entered the tea house. She'd positioned herself at a window seat, close enough to see but far enough to remain unnoticed. She watched as Kwame's old colleague entered, a tall man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never known defeat, someone who'd always gotten what he wanted. "You look well, Hyun-soo," Kwame said, his voice carrying across the room despite its softness. "As do you." The man, Hyun-soo, settled into the seat across from Kwame, his movements unhurried. "I hear you've been busy, building a legitimate business, starting a family, playing house." "Playing house." Kwame's smile was sharp, dangerous. "Is that what you think this is?" "I think you're fooling yourself." Hyun-soo leaned forward, his voice dropping to something confidential. "I think you're pretending to be something you're not. But the truth is, you can't escape what you are. You're one of us, Kwame. You always will be." "You're wrong." Kwame's voice was calm, but Tendai could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm not the same person I was. I've changed. And I'm never going back." "Changed?" Hyun-soo laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the tea house's wooden walls. "People don't change, Kwame. They just find better ways to hide what they really are. And you're the best at hiding. You've always been the best. Believe what you want." Kwame stood, pushing back his chair. "But I'll tell you this, if you come near my family again, If you even think about threatening them, I'll make you regret it. Not because I'm still the man I used to be, but because I've become a man who has something worth protecting. Hyun-Soo's eyes narrowed, his expression flickering with something that might have been respect. You've changed, he said slowly. I can see it. I can feel it. And I don't know if that makes you stronger or weaker. But I do know this. You're not the same man I used to know. No, Kwame agreed. I'm not. And that's a good thing. The confrontation had an unexpected effect. Hyun-Soo wasn't just a threat. He was a symbol of everything Kwame had left behind, everything he was trying to escape. And the conversation, tense and dangerous as it was, proved something important. Kwame was willing to walk away. He could have gone back to his old life, to the violence and chaos that had once defined him. But he hadn't. He'd chosen differently. He'd chosen his family, his future, his hope. And that choice was the most powerful thing he could have done. Thank you, Tendai said that night, after Tafadzwa was asleep and the apartment was quiet. Thank you for choosing us. Kwame looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. I didn't choose you, he said. I chose myself. I chose the person I want to be. And that person is someone who deserves to have you in his life. The weeks that followed were peaceful. The threat from Hyun-Soo seemed to have faded. Not entirely, not forever, but enough that Tendai could breathe again. She and Kwame settled into a routine, navigating the challenges of co-parenting and coexisting, learning to trust each other in small ways. But peace, Tendai knew, was often just the quiet before the storm. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Kwame's grandmother had arranged it, a gathering of the entire extended family, a formal acknowledgement of Tendai and Tafadzwa's place in the household. The guest list was extensive, the preparations elaborate. But someone else had an invitation too. He shouldn't be here, Kwame said, his voice tight. He wasn't invited. Tendai followed his gaze across the room, and her blood ran cold. Hyun-Soo stood in the corner of the ballroom, his cold eyes surveying the crowd. He was dressed in formal wear, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Kwame, Tendai said, her voice barely above a whisper. What is he doing here? I don't know. Kwame's jaw tightened. But I'm going to find out. He crossed the room, making his way through the crowd with a purpose that drew eyes. Tendai watched, her heart racing, as he approached his old colleague. I don't remember inviting you, Kwame said, his voice carrying a warning that was unmistakable. You didn't. Hyun-Soo's smile was cold. But your grandmother did. She wanted to make peace. She thought it would be good for the family to have no more secrets, no more hidden enemies. She had no right. She had every right. Hyun-Soo's voice hardened. Your grandmother and I have a long history, Kwame. You think she didn't know about my involvement in the business? You think she wasn't the one who arranged for me to take over when you left? Kwame's face went pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the truth. Hyun-Soo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. I was never your second in command, Kwame. I was your grandmother's eyes and ears. I was her way of keeping you on the right path. And when you strayed, she sent me to bring you back. The revelation was so shocking that Tendai felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Harabiaji, the gentle grandmother, the woman who had welcomed her into the family, she had been behind it all? It's not true, Kwame said, but his voice wavered. It's the truth. Hyun-Soo smiled. Your grandmother has been playing a long game, Kwame. She wanted you to have a family, to have someone to protect. She knew that would make you stronger, more focused. And she knew that I would be waiting, ready to step in when the time was right. Step in for what? For the final phase. Hyun-Soo's eyes glittered. Your grandmother is dying, Kwame. She's been hiding it for months. But the truth is, she doesn't have much time left. And before she goes, she wants to make sure the family's future is secure. She wants you to take your place as the head of the organization, the legitimate and the illegitimate parts. She's been setting this up for years. She just needed you to be ready. The truth was a shattering blow. Kwame retreated to a corner of the ballroom, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Tendai followed him, her heart aching for the betrayal he was processing. Your grandmother was trying to protect you, she said softly. In her own way, she was trying to give you a future. By controlling my life, by manipulating everyone around me. His voice was bitter. That's not protection. That's exploitation. Maybe. Tendai touched his arm, her touch gentle. But she's still your grandmother. She still raised you. She still loves you. And she's dying, Kwame. Dying people make desperate choices. Kwame looked at her. His eyes filled with a pain that cut her to the quick. How can you be so forgiving? He asked. How can you see the good in someone who did this to you? Because I know what it's like to make desperate choices. Tendai's voice was steady. I know what it's like to do something terrible because you think it's the only way to protect the people you love. I've been there, Kwame. And so have you. He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. She's dying, he repeated. She's dying, and she wanted to make sure I had everything I needed to succeed. She wanted to make sure I had a family, a purpose, a reason to fight. She gave you more than that, Tendai said softly. She gave you me. She gave us each other. Without her interference, we never would have found our way back. The reconciliation was quiet. Harabiaji had retreated to a private room, her face pale, her hands trembling. But when Kwame and Tendai entered, she looked up with eyes that held no regret. I did what I had to do, she said, her voice fragile but fierce. I made choices that I'm not proud of. But I did them because I love you. Both of you. All of you. I know, Kwame said, taking her hand. And I forgive you. The old woman's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she whispered. I don't deserve any of this. Maybe not. Kwame squeezed her hand. But I'm giving it to you anyway. Because you're my grandmother. Because you raised me. Because you gave me a family when I had none. More than a family. Harabiaji's eyes turned to Tendai. I gave you her. I gave you your son. And that's the best thing I ever did. The funeral was a quiet affair. Harabiaji had requested simplicity. No grand displays, no elaborate ceremonies. Just family, gathered together to say goodbye. The old woman had passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the people she loved. She'd made peace with Kwame in her final days, had spoken at length with Tendai about the future, had told Tafadzwa stories that made him laugh. She was a remarkable woman, Tendai said as they stood at the gravesite. She had her flaws, her mistakes, but she loved her family with everything she had. She did. Kwame's voice was thick with emotion. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to her example. Tendai reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. You will, she said. I know you will. The aftermath of Harabiaji's death brought unexpected challenges. Hyunsu had been telling the truth about the family's dual nature, the legitimate business and the illegitimate operations. Without Harabiaji's steady hand, the organization was in flux, and there were those who wanted Kwame to step into the void. Don't do it, Tendai said, her voice fierce. Don't let them pull you back in. I won't. Kwame's voice was firm. I'm going to dismantle it, Tendai. All of it. The legitimate parts I'll keep. The illegitimate parts I'll destroy. It'll take time, but I can do it. How? She shook her head, skeptical. How can you possibly destroy something that powerful? By being smarter than they are. He smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. By using the resources I have, the resources Harabiaji gave me, to do something good. The plan was ambitious, but Kwame was determined. He spent weeks meeting with lawyers, accountants, former associates who'd shared his desire for a better life. He laid out a strategy for transitioning the organization into something legitimate, something that would honor Harabiaji's legacy without perpetuating her mistakes. And slowly, gradually, he began to succeed. It's working, he told Tendai one evening, his voice filled with wonder. It's actually working. I never doubted you, she smiled. I knew you could do it. Because you believe in me. He pulled her into his arms. Because you've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Tafadzwa was growing up. He was 5 now, enrolled in a small international school that catered to expat families. He was learning English and Korean and Shona, his mind as flexible as any child's. "Can I show you my tower?" he asked Kwame one afternoon, his expression earnest. "I built it with the blocks you gave me." "You can show me your tower," Kwame said, kneeling down to his son's level. "I'd like to see it." The tower was a marvel of preschool engineering, blocks balanced with surprising precision, colors arranged in a pattern that was almost artistic. "That's beautiful," Kwame said. "Did you build it all by yourself?" "Mostly." Tafadzwa considered the question. "Sometimes the blocks fall down and I have to rebuild, but I keep trying until I get it right." "Just like your mama," Kwame said, his voice warm. "She never gives up either. And just like you, Appa." The word Appa, father, was a recent addition to Tafadzwa's vocabulary. It had taken months to earn, months of Kwame proving himself, months of trust building. And when he heard it, Kwame felt his heart crack open. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for saying that." Tafadzwa shrugged, the gesture so like Kwame's that Tendai had to suppress a laugh. "You're my Appa," he said. "You're always going to be my Appa." The wedding was a celebration of two cultures. Tendai wore a modern gown in shimmering gold, the fabric catching the light with every movement. Kwame had chosen a traditional Korean hanbok in deep navy, the colors complementing her outfit perfectly. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Tendai said, her voice trembling. "I can't believe we made it." "Neither can I." Kwame took her hands, his gaze steady. "But here we are, together, where we were always meant to be." The ceremony was performed by a Shona elder and a Korean officiant, blending traditions in a way that felt natural and right. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising to honor each other's heritage and build a future that encompassed everything they were. "From now on," Kwame said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "we are not just a family. We are a symbol of what can happen when two different worlds come together in love." The end was not an end. Tendai and Kwame built a life together, a life that honored their past while embracing their future. They raised Tafadzwa with the best of both cultures, teaching him to respect his Zimbabwean heritage and his Korean roots. And they loved each other, openly and completely, without reservation. "You were always my destiny," Kwame said one evening, as they watched the sun set over the Seoul skyline. "I just had to wait long enough to become worthy of you." "You were always worthy," Tendai replied, leaning into him. "You just had to learn to see it for yourself." They had started in chaos and pain. They had found their way through confusion and fear. And in the end, they had discovered something that transcended everything that had come before. Love, family, home. The Korean Mafia boss and the Zimbabwean engineer. They'd been frozen in time, separated by years and secrets. But love had melted the ice. 5 years later, Tafadzwa was 9 now, tall for his age, with his mother's gentle eyes and his father's determined jaw. He was clever and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. "Appa, how do skyscrapers stay standing?" he asked one afternoon, watching a construction site from his father's office window. Kwame smiled, a warm expression that softened the angles of his face. "You're going to have to ask your mother that question. She's the engineer. She already taught me about tension and compression," Tafadzwa said, his voice earnest. "But I want to understand how they fit together." "You will, eventually." Kwame placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You have time. You have your whole life to learn everything." And he would. Tendai and Kwame would make sure of it, that their son understood his heritage, his history, his potential. He would know the beauty of Zimbabwe, the creativity of the Shona people, the art of making something beautiful out of raw materials. He would know the discipline of Korea, the resilience of its people, the strength that came from community and connection. He would know the love that had brought his parents together, the same love that had conquered years of separation and misunderstanding. He would be the best of both worlds. And he would teach his children, and their children after them, until the story of the Korean Mafia boss and the Zimbabwean engineer became legend. They were frozen in time once, but now they were free.
Hey loves, this story teaches us that sometimes love doesn't fail because it isn't real. It fails because fear, secrets, and the past gets in the way. But when people choose honesty, growth, and forgiveness, even the most broken stories can be rebuilt into a stronger family. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like and subscribe.